Welcome to Calm Buddha. In the quiet stillness that exists between your thoughts, a profound and ancient truth awaits you. Imagine for a moment that within your own mind lies a sanctuary of peace so vast and boundless that no external circumstance could ever disturb it. What if I told you that, according to Zen Buddhism, this sanctuary isn't something you need to build or create? It is something you already possess, like a clear, still lake hidden beneath the surface of your daily worries. This is the heart of the Zen path, a timeless journey that teaches us how to uncover our true nature, a nature that remains undisturbed even in the midst of life's greatest storms. The journey of Zen is not about adding anything new to your life, but rather about the gentle art of removing the layers of confusion and dust that prevent you from recognizing what has always been there. It is a process of seeing through the illusions that cause us to suffer and returning to what the Zen masters call our original face, the face we had before we were born, before a name and a story were given to us. This journey isn't just an abstract philosophy. It is intensely practical, offering time-tested tools for navigating the challenges of everyday existence with greater ease and clarity. An old Zen saying puts it with a profound simplicity. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. This teaching reveals a fundamental truth. Zen is not about escaping life, but about being fully present within it. It's about discovering extraordinary meaning in the most ordinary moments and finding freedom not by changing our external circumstances, but by transforming our relationship to them. Consider for a moment how much of your suffering comes not from events themselves, but from your resistance to them. When rain falls on your wedding day, is it the rain itself that causes distress? Or is it your deep-seated attachment to how the day should have been? When someone speaks harshly to you, is it their words that truly hurt, or is it your clinging to how you wish they had spoken? Zen invites us to examine these questions deeply, not as intellectual exercises, but as gateways to genuine liberation. The essence of Zen lies in its directness. It doesn't ask you to believe in complex philosophical systems or to adopt elaborate rituals. Instead, it points directly to your own mind as the source of both your suffering and your freedom. Through practices like zazen or sitting meditation, we learn to observe the mind without becoming entangled in its constant restless movement. We discover that thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in the sky, and that we are not those thoughts, but the vast, unchanging awareness in which they appear. Imagine standing by a peaceful river watching leaves float downstream. Some leaves move quickly, others slowly. Some get caught in an eddy before continuing their journey. This is how Zen teaches us to observe our thoughts, not by trying to stop the river's flow, but by watching it pass by without attachment. When we cease identifying with every thought that crosses our mind, we begin to experience a profound shift in our relationship to life itself. It's a quiet revolution of the heart where we discover a stillness that no thought can ever disturb. A Zen master once asked his disciples, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" This koan, or paradoxical riddle, isn't meant to be solved through logic. Its purpose is to exhaust the analytical mind to create a stillness and an opening for direct, non-conceptual insight. In the space that lies beyond concepts and categories, beyond the endless chatter of the thinking mind, lies the possibility of awakening to what has always been here. True freedom from the Zen perspective does not come from controlling our environment or from getting what we want. It comes from releasing our grip on how we think things should be and meeting life exactly as it is. This doesn't mean passive resignation or giving up on positive change. Rather, it means acting from a place of clarity and presence, rather than from reactivity and delusion. Picture a gentle river flowing around a large rock in its path. The water doesn't fight against the rock, it simply finds its way around it, continuing its journey with an effortless grace. This is the quality of being that Zen seeks to cultivate. Now imagine a small, quiet village nestled in the misty mountains. A farmer lives there, tending to his fields with a calm and steady hand. One day, his horse, a powerful and beautiful animal, runs away. The farmer's neighbors, full of concern, come to console him. "What bad luck," they say, shaking their heads. The farmer simply smiles and replies, "Maybe." His voice is soft, a whisper on the wind, his face showing no sign of distress or despair. The next day, the horse returns, bringing with it several wild horses from the mountains. "What good fortune!" exclaimed the neighbors, their expressions now full of excitement and wonder. The farmer, standing in his courtyard bathed in the morning light, simply responds, "Maybe." His hands are calm, his gaze steady, as if he sees something beyond the immediate appearance of events. A few days later, the farmer's son is thrown while trying to tame one of the wild horses and breaks his leg. How terrible! The neighbors sympathize, their faces once again grim. "Maybe," says the farmer as he tends to his son's leg, his movements gentle and deliberate. His mind is not lost in a spiral of anger or regret. He is simply present with the reality before him. Then a week later, military officials arrive in the village to draft young men into the army. When they see the farmer's son with his broken leg, they pass him over. "What good luck, Trur!" The neighbors say their words, a mix of relief and surprise. "Maybe," replies the farmer, his tone as unattached as before. This story illustrates the profound Zen understanding that life unfolds in ways we cannot predict or control. Our judgments about what is good or bad are based on a limited perspective and often prove to be premature. By suspending these quick judgments and remaining open to the unfolding of life, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. We stop fighting against the natural current of existence and begin to align more deeply with reality as it truly is. The practice of zazen, or sitting meditation, forms the very heart of Zen training. Imagine stepping into a quiet temple courtyard at dusk. The air is cool and still carrying the scent of incense and damp earth, with a single gentle bell tolling in the distance. In zazen, we simply sit, allowing everything to be as it is. This might sound easy, but anyone who has tried to sit still for even a few minutes knows the deep restlessness of the untrained mind. Thoughts cascade endlessly, the body fidgets, and discomfort arises in the knees or back. Yet it is precisely by sitting with these experiences, not trying to change them, but simply observing them with a kind and gentle attention, that we begin to discover a deeper dimension of being. When we sit in zazen, we aren't trying to stop thinking or to achieve some special state of bliss. We're simply learning to be present with whatever arises. It is like a wise old gardener tending to a patch of weeds. They don't yank them out with force, but watch them grow, noticing their shape and color, and in that gentle observation, the weeds naturally lose their power. The Japanese Zen master Dogen taught that to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. This forgetting of the self doesn't mean erasing our identity. It means seeing through the illusion of a separate, solid self that stands apart from the rest of life. It's the quiet understanding that the boundary between me and the world is not as solid as we have been conditioned to believe. In our everyday lives, we often move through the world as if we are separate from it, as if there is a me in here and the world out there. This feeling of separation creates a fundamental anxiety, the feeling that I am a small and vulnerable entity in a vast and potentially threatening universe. Zen practice helps us recognize that this boundary is not as fixed as we imagine. In moments of clear seeing, we might recognize that we are not separate from the world, but are in fact the world experiencing itself in a particular way. This recognition doesn't happen through intellectual understanding alone. It emerges through direct experience. Perhaps you've had glimpses of this while watching a breathtaking sunset during a moment of creative flow, or in times of great joy or sorrow when the usual boundaries of self seem to dissolve. Zen practice helps us cultivate the conditions for such insights to arise more frequently, to come to us like a quiet visitor in the night, and to inform our daily lives. One of the core teachings of Zen is the principle of non-duality expressed in the ancient Heart Sutra, with the enigmatic phrase, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." This teaching points to the inseparability of the material world, what we call form, and the boundless, ungraspable nature of reality, what we call emptiness. Every object, every experience, every thought has these two inseparable aspects. It appears solid and real, a distinct thing. Yet when we look deeply, we find that it is also fluid, interconnected, and impossible to pin down. Consider a single wave in the vast, dark ocean. From one perspective, the wave appears as a distinct entity with its own characteristics. It has a certain height, shape, and movement. Yet from another perspective, that wave is inseparable from the ocean itself. It is made entirely of water, continuously changing, eventually merging back into the vastness from which it arose. So too, with our experiences, our emotions, and even our sense of self, they arise temporarily, have their moment in the sun, and then pass away, all within the boundless field of our awareness. This understanding profoundly transforms our relationship to suffering. When difficult emotions arise, such as anger, fear, or grief, we can recognize them as waves in the ocean of our consciousness. We don't need to suppress them or be overwhelmed by them. We can allow them to move through us with awareness, knowing they are temporary manifestations rather than defining truths about who we are. A famous Zen story tells of a monk who asked his teacher, "It is very hot, and how shall we escape the heat?" The teacher replied, "Why not go to the place where there is no heat?" The monk inquired, "Where is the place where there is no heat?" The teacher said, "When heat comes, heat kills. When cold comes, cold kills." This enigmatic response points to a profound truth. Freedom isn't found by escaping uncomfortable conditions, but by meeting them completely without adding the extra layer of resistance that turns physical discomfort into mental suffering. In our daily lives, we spend enormous energy trying to arrange conditions to be just right, the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect body. Zen doesn't dismiss the importance of these things, but it reminds us that true peace doesn't depend on getting everything exactly the way we want it. Rather, it comes from finding the place within that remains undisturbed regardless of external conditions. of the ocean that remain still, even when the surface is tossed by storms. The practice of mindfulness in Zen isn't about creating pleasant experiences or achieving states of bliss. It's about developing the capacity to be present with whatever arises, whether pleasant or unpleasant, without being carried away by it. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. On the contrary, by not wasting energy in resistance to what is, we become more capable of clear and effective action. Consider the difference between walking on a slick patch of ice while tense and afraid of falling versus walking with a relaxed awareness that responds fluidly to changing conditions. The tense walker is actually more likely to fall because their rigidity prevents them from adapting moment by moment. Similarly, when we approach life's challenges with rigid expectations and resistance, we reduce our capacity to respond skillfully. In Zen practice, we cultivate what is called beginner's mind, a quality of openness and curiosity that isn't limited by preconceptions. Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Zen to America, famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." When we approach each moment freshly without imposing our ideas of how things should be, we discover new possibilities for responding to life's challenges. This beginner's mind is particularly valuable in times of significant change or uncertainty. When familiar structures fall away, a relationship ends, a job is lost, health declines. Naturally, we want to grasp for security and control. Zen invites us instead to remain open to not knowing, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to life's uncertainty. In this vulnerable openness, we may discover resources within ourselves that were previously hidden, like a deep well of resilience we never knew existed. There's a story of a Zen master who was known for his equanimity. A student asked him, "Master, how do you maintain such peace of mind?" The master replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep." The student, confused, said, "But that's what everyone does. We all eat, walk, and sleep." The master smiled and said, "No, when most people eat, they're thinking about walking. When they walk, they're thinking about sleeping. When they sleep, they're thinking about eating. They're never fully present for their lives." This complete presence, this wholehearted engagement with the activity of the moment is at the very heart of Zen practice. It's not about achieving some special state, but about removing the veils that prevent us from experiencing the extraordinary richness of ordinary life. When we're fully present for the simple act of drinking a cup of tea, of listening to a friend, or of feeling the breeze on our skin, we touch a dimension of being that is inherently peaceful and complete. It is in these moments that we find the serenity we often seek in grand, far-off goals. Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of everyday activities as opportunities for practice. Chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, washing dishes, these mundane tasks become vehicles for awakening when approached with full attention. There's a beautiful story of a monk who asked his teacher for instructions on the path to enlightenment. The teacher asked, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk replied, "Yes." The teacher then said, "Then wash your bowl." This simple instruction contains the very essence of Zen. The sacred isn't found apart from the ordinary, but within it. The practice of Zen doesn't promise to remove all difficulties from life. Pain, loss, and change are inevitable aspects of human existence. What Zen offers is a way to meet these realities without the additional suffering that comes from resistance. When we stop fighting against the nature of life, its impermanence, its unpredictability, its occasional harshness, we discover a freedom that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. Consider the difference between swimming against a strong current, exhausting yourself in the struggle, versus learning to flow with it using its energy to navigate skillfully. Zen practice helps us recognize when we're swimming against the current of reality and offers tools for aligning ourselves more harmoniously with the way things are. We learn to dance with the flow of life rather than fighting it. One of the most profound teachings of Zen concerns our relationship with time. We often live as if happiness is somewhere in the future when we achieve our goals, find the right partner, or retire with enough money. Or we live caught in the past, replaying old wounds, dwelling on regrets, or romanticizing the good old days. Zen points us back to the present moment, not as a spiritual platitude, but as a practical recognition that the present is the only place where life actually happens. This return to the present isn't achieved through force or rigid will, but through the gentle yet persistent practice of noticing when the mind has wandered and bringing it back to our current experience. It's like training a puppy. We do this thousands of times with patience and kindness toward ourselves when we get lost in thought. Over time, we develop the capacity to rest more consistently in present awareness, neither pulled into the past nor pushed into the future. This is where true peace is found. The Zen approach to suffering is particularly valuable in our modern world, where we're often taught that uncomfortable emotions are problems to be solved rather than experiences to be met with awareness. When sadness arises, we reach for distractions, food, entertainment, social media. When anxiety appears, we try to think our way out of it or numb it with substances. Zen offers a different, more gentle path to turn toward our suffering with a kind and open attention. This path invites us to give suffering space to be felt fully and to recognize that it too is a passing phenomenon rather than a defining reality. This doesn't mean wallowing in pain or indulging in endless processing of difficult emotions. Rather, it means developing the capacity to be with our experience as it is without needing to fix, change, or escape it. Paradoxically, it is often through this complete acceptance that transformation naturally occurs. Imagine a student who comes to his teacher in great distress saying, "Master, I'm feeling so much anger lately. What should I do?" The teacher, with a calm gaze, replies, "Show me this anger." The student, confused, says, "Well, I'm not angry right now, but it keeps coming up." The teacher smiles and says, "So, it's not who you are. It's just something that visits occasionally. When it comes again, welcome it in for tea. Observe it closely. See what it has to teach you and watch how, like all guests, it eventually leaves on its own." This teaching beautifully illustrates the Zen approach to difficult emotions, not to identify with them as who I am, but to recognize them as temporary visitors in the spaciousness of awareness. This shift in perspective from "I am angry" to "anger is arising and being experienced" creates a profound change in our relationship to emotional states. It is the beginning of true inner freedom. Zen practice also transforms our relationship to desire. Much of our suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are, wanting more pleasure, less pain, more recognition, less criticism. We live in a constant state of reaching for what isn't here and pushing away what is. This creates a background hum of dissatisfaction that colors our experience even in relatively fortunate circumstances. The Buddha identified this restless wanting as the root of suffering. But the solution isn't to eliminate desire entirely. Rather, it is to see through the false promise that getting what we want will bring lasting happiness. When we observe closely, we notice that even when we get exactly what we desire, the satisfaction is often brief before a new wanting arises. This recognition doesn't make us passive or apathetic. It simply helps us hold our desires more lightly without being driven by them. There is a famous Zen story about a monk who was being chased by a ferocious tiger. He came to the edge of a sheer cliff, saw a vine growing over the edge, and quickly climbed down it to escape. As he hung there, suspended between the two dangers, he looked down and saw another tiger waiting at the bottom of the cliff. To make matters worse, he noticed two tiny mice, one white and one black, gnawing steadily at the vine above him, slowly fraying the strands. In this incredibly precarious position, the monk's eyes fell upon a wild strawberry growing on the cliffside just within his reach. He picked it, put it in his mouth, and with a full heart exclaimed, "How sweet!" This story beautifully illustrates the Zen approach to life. Even in the midst of danger and uncertainty, symbolized by the tigers, even with the knowledge of our own mortality, represented by the mice of day and night, gradually shortening our lives, we can fully taste the sweetness of the present moment. This isn't about ignoring reality, but about experiencing it completely, without the overlay of conceptual thinking that often removes us from direct experience. The practice of Zazen develops our capacity for this direct experience. As we sit quietly observing the breath and allowing thoughts to come and go without following them, we are training ourselves to be present for life as it is happening, not as we think about it. This quality of presence isn't limited to formal meditation. It gradually infuses all our activities, allowing us to live with greater fullness and appreciation. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck described this process as nothing special, not a pursuit of extraordinary states, but an intimate engagement with ordinary life. She wrote, "Our lives are always all right. There's nothing wrong with them. Even if we have horrendous problems, it's just our life." This radical acceptance doesn't mean resigned passivity. It means a clear-eyed engagement with life that doesn't waste energy in resistance to what cannot be changed. This acceptance extends to ourselves as well. Many of us carry a harsh inner critic that constantly judges and finds us lacking. Zen practice helps us recognize this voice not as a fundamental truth, but as conditioned thinking. As we develop the capacity to observe thoughts without automatically believing them, we create space for a more compassionate relationship with ourselves and others. We begin to see the extraordinary simply by being present for the ordinary. A famous Zen saying tells us, "The obstacle is the path." This counterintuitive wisdom points to the fact that the very difficulties we try to avoid often contain our greatest opportunities for growth and awakening. When we stop seeing challenges as interruptions to our life and start recognizing them as our life as the curriculum perfectly designed for our particular learning, our relationship to difficulty is completely transformed. Consider how a muscle grows stronger through the resistance of weights, or how a beautiful pearl forms around an irritating grain of sand. Similarly, our capacity for wisdom and compassion develops not despite life's difficulties, but precisely because of them. This is true if we learn to work with them skillfully, rather than simply reacting to them habitually. This doesn't mean we should seek out suffering or passively accept injustice. Zen has a long and powerful tradition of social engagement, with practitioners working actively to alleviate creates suffering in the world. The difference lies in how this action arises, not from aggression or self-righteousness, but from a clear seeing of what is needed in each situation, a seeing unobstructed by rigid ideologies or personal agendas. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This forgetting of the self doesn't mean erasing our identity, but seeing through the illusion of a separate, independent self. When we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness with all of life, compassionate action flows naturally, not as something we force ourselves to do, but as the spontaneous expression of our true nature. In Zen, this recognition isn't considered a special achievement reserved for spiritual virtuosos. It is our birthright as human beings. Each of us has what is called Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakening to our true nature. This awakening isn't about becoming something we're not, but about recognizing what we've always been beneath the layers of conditioning and confusion. A Zen master was once asked, "What is Buddha?" He replied, 3 pounds of flax." This seemingly nonsensical answer points to the fact that Buddha nature isn't some mystical essence hidden within us, but the ordinary, everyday reality of our existence. It's not something to be attained in the future, but to be recognized right now in the midst of our imperfect, messy human lives. This recognition doesn't happen once and for all, but occurs in moments, gradually becoming more stable and informing more of our life as we continue to practice. The Zen path is not about reaching a final destination, but about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more and more clearly the nature of reality and our place within it. This journey of awakening is not linear. It spirals back on itself, revisiting the same territories with deepened understanding. As the saying goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities may look the same from the outside, but they're experienced differently, with less struggle, greater presence, and a profound sense of connection to all of life. In our modern world of constant distraction and acceleration, the invitation of Zen to slow down and pay attention can feel both challenging and desperately needed. We've become accustomed to what might be called divided attention, checking our phones while in conversation, thinking about work while with family, and planning for tomorrow while barely tasting today's meal. This fragmented awareness leaves us feeling perpetually unsatisfied, always seeking the next thing without fully experiencing what's already here. Zen practice counteracts this tendency not by forcing the mind to concentrate, but by awakening a quiet interest in the present moment. When we truly pay attention to the sensation of breathing, to the play of moonlight on a river, or to the subtle expressions on a loved one's face, we discover a richness in ordinary experience that we usually miss in our hurried lives. There is a story of a man on horseback who appears to be in a great hurry, his clothes and hair disheveled from the wind. A bystander, curious, calls out, "Where are you going in such a rush?" The rider, without slowings, shouts back, "I don't know. Ask the horse." This simple parable illustrates how many of us live carried along by our habits and reactivity, rarely pausing to question our direction or to make conscious choices about how we're living. Zen invites us to take the reins of attention back from the runaway horse of habit. Through practices like Zazen, we develop the capacity to notice when we've been carried away by thought and to gently return to present awareness. This doesn't happen through force or strain, but through the gentle yet persistent practice of noticing and returning thousands of times with patience and kindness toward ourselves when we get lost. This quality of attention isn't just about personal peace. It profoundly affects how we move through the world and interact with others. When we are fully present with another person, we offer them the rare and precious gift of being truly seen and heard. When we are fully engaged in our work, whatever it might be, we bring a quality of care and excellence to our actions rather than simply rushing through them to get to something else. A Zen student once asked his teacher, "Master, what is the most important thing?" The teacher replied, "Attention." The student, thinking he hadn't heard correctly, repeated his question again. The teacher said, "Attention." Somewhat irritated, the student asked, "I understand that attention is important, but what is the most important thing?" The master looked at him deeply and said, "Attention means attention." This teaching points to the centrality of awareness itself. The cultivation of present awareness is not just a means to an end, it is the very heart of the path. As we become more fully present for our lives, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning connection, isn't found somewhere else, but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. This doesn't mean that life suddenly becomes easy or that difficulties disappear. Pain, loss, illness, and death remain realities of human existence. What changes through Zen practice is our relationship to these realities. Instead of adding layers of resistance, judgment, and narrative to our direct experience, we learn to meet it more simply and directly. Consider the experience of physical pain. When pain arises in the body, we typically react in one of two ways. Either we tense against it, trying to push it away, or we collapse into it, becoming identified with the suffering. Zen offers a middle way to create a spacious awareness around the pain, to observe it with kind attention without either fighting or drowning in it. In this spacious awareness, we discover that pain itself is just sensation. It's our resistance and identification that transform it into suffering. The same principle applies to emotional pain. When grief, anger, or fear arise, our habitual reaction is to either suppress these feelings or to become completely identified with them, thinking, "I am angry." Zen practice helps us recognize that emotions, like all phenomena, arise and pass away within the field of awareness. They are real but temporary, significant, but not all defining. This understanding doesn't make us cold or detached. On the contrary, it allows us to engage more fully with life's intensity. When we're not afraid of difficult emotions, when we know from experience that we can be with them without being overwhelmed, we become capable of greater intimacy, vulnerability, and authenticity in our relationships with ourselves and others. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote, "To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening." This enigmatic statement points to a fundamental shift in perspective from seeing ourselves as separate entities moving through the world to recognizing that we are the world experiencing itself in a particular way. This shift isn't just philosophical, it has profound implications for how we live. When we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness with all of life, compassion flows naturally. It's not something we have to force or fake, but the natural response of a heart that doesn't see itself as separate from others' suffering. A Zen story tells of a young monk who was frustrated by feelings of anger that kept arising despite his sincere practice. He went to his teacher and asked, "I keep feeling anger. How can I overcome it?" The teacher, with a calm gaze, replied, "Show me this anger." The monk replied, "I'm not angry right now. The anger comes and goes." The teacher smiled and said, "That's not your true nature then. If it were your true nature, it would be present all the time, like your nose or your eyes. These angry thoughts are just passing clouds in the sky of your mind. Don't identify with them and don't resist them. Just let them pass." This teaching points to what Zen calls our original face, the awareness that is present before thoughts and emotions arise. It is the consciousness that remains constant while experiences come and go, like the unmoving sky that holds all the changing weather patterns. Through practice, we gradually learn to rest in this spacious awareness rather than being carried away by every thought and feeling that crosses our inner landscape. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. In fact, when we're not exhausting ourselves in inner struggle and resistance, we have more energy available for effective action in the world. The Bodhisattva ideal in Zen of the awakened being, who works tirelessly for the benefit of all, is not about martyrdom or self-sacrifice. It is about the natural expression of wisdom and compassion once the illusion of separation has been seen through. In our daily lives, this might look like being more patient with a difficult family member because we see their behavior as coming from their own suffering rather than as a personal attack. It might manifest as having the courage to speak truth to power because we are less controlled by fear. It might appear as the capacity to stay present with a friend's grief without needing to fix or change it because we are comfortable with the full range of human emotion. The practice of Zen isn't about achieving some special state or having extraordinary experiences. It is about showing up fully for ordinary life with all its joys and sorrows, its beauty and its pain. As Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Our practice is not to clear up the mystery, it is to make the mystery clear." This clarity doesn't come from figuring everything out intellectually, but from a direct perception that is available when the mind becomes still and present. It's like the difference between reading about water and actually drinking it, or between studying a map and walking the terrain. Zen emphasizes direct experience over conceptual understanding, though both have their place. There's a famous Zen story about this distinction. A learned university professor came to visit a renowned master to inquire about Zen. As they sat together, the master began pouring tea into the professor's cup. He poured until the cup was full, and then, to the professor's bewilderment, he continued pouring so that the tea spilled over the rim and onto the table. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. "It's full," he exclaimed. "No more will go in." The master stopped pouring and with a calm smile said, "Like this cup, your mind is full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This teaching reminds us that sometimes our greatest obstacle to insight is what we think we already know. The practice of beginner's mind, approaching experience with openness and curiosity rather than preconceived ideas, creates space for fresh perception and direct understanding. In Zen, this understanding isn't considered esoteric or separate from everyday life. The mundane activities of eating, walking, working, and relating become the very field of practice. As the saying goes, Zen is not some kind of excitement, but concentration on our usual everyday routine. This focus on the ordinary doesn't mean Zen is devoid of mystery or wonder. On the contrary, as we learn to be fully present for simple experiences, the taste of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the sensation of breathing, we discover an extraordinary richness that was always available but overlooked in our habitual rushing and thinking. Zen practice also transforms our relationship to effort. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that trying harder is always the answer, that sheer force of will can overcome any obstacle. Zen offers a different perspective, one that might be called effortless effort or non-doing. This doesn't mean passivity or laziness, but a quality of engagement that isn't driven by striving or dominated by the sense of a separate self making things happen. Consider the difference between trying to fall asleep and simply allowing sleep to happen, or between forcing a creative solution and allowing insight to arise. Some things cannot be achieved through direct effort, but require a different approach, creating the conditions and then letting go of control. In Zazen, we don't try to stop thinking or to achieve a particular state. We simply create the conditions, a stable posture, present attention, and allow the natural settling of the mind to occur. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki put it, Zen practice is to open up our small mind. This opening happens not through force, but through sustained, gentle attention. This principle applies beyond formal practice to all of life. Often our very effort to solve a problem keeps us locked in patterns that perpetuate it. When we step back, allow a little space, and approach the situation with beginner's mind, new possibilities emerge that weren't visible from within our habitual perspective. A Zen story illustrates this beautifully. A man was rowing his small boat on a misty morning when suddenly another boat collided with his. He became furious, raising his voice and shouting at the other boater. But as the mist cleared, he saw that the other boat was empty, simply drifting with the current. His anger immediately disappeared. This parable points to how much of our emotional reactivity comes from the attribution of intention to events. When we believe someone is deliberately causing us difficulty, we react with anger. But when we recognize that most people are simply carried along by their own conditioning, like empty boats drifting with the current, compassion naturally arises. This doesn't mean we become passive in the face of harmful behavior. We can still set boundaries and work for positive change, but we do so without the added suffering of rage and resentment, without taking things so personally. This shift from reactivity to responsibility is one of the most valuable fruits of Zen practice. The Zen approach to difficulty is captured in a saying attributed to Shunryu Suzuki. The most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. When we're caught up in the details of a challenging situation, we often lose sight of what really matters. Zen practice helps us step back and reconnect with our deeper values and purpose. This perspective doesn't eliminate problems, but puts them in a larger context. From the vantage point of the entire mountain range, the hill we're currently climbing doesn't seem so insurmountable. From the perspective of our whole life journey, today's crisis may appear as just one chapter in a longer story. There's another version of the farmer's story that deepens this lesson. A farmer whose horse ran away was told by his neighbor, "That's terrible luck." The farmer replied, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned with 3 wild horses. "How wonderful!" exclaimed the neighbor. "Maybe," responded the farmer. The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride. One of the wild horses fell off and broke his leg. What a tragedy! sympathized the neighbor. Maybe, said the farmer. A week later, military officials came to the village to draft young men into the army, but the farmer's son was passed over because of his broken leg. What good fortune, the neighbor remarked. Maybe, said the farmer. This story illustrates the Zen perspective on the unpredictability of life and the limitations of our judgments about what is fortunate or unfortunate. By suspending our quick judgments about the ultimate meaning of events, we remain open to life's unfolding with greater equanimity. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. We still make choices, take action, and work to create positive conditions. But we do so without the rigid attachment to outcomes that creates so much suffering. When things don't go according to plan, we learn to dance with life as it actually is, rather than struggling against the reality of constant change. The Zen approach to change is particularly valuable in times of transition and loss. When something we've relied on, a relationship, a job, our health is taken away, our natural tendency is to resist and cling. Zen reminds us that everything is always changing, that nothing remains the same from moment to moment. What we think of as stable entities, including our own identity, are actually processes in constant flux. This truth is captured in the famous teaching of the ancient philosopher Heraclitus that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. The river is continuously flowing and changing, and we too are constantly in flux. When we truly understand this at a deep level, not just intellectually, but in our very bones, our desperate grip on life loosens. We still engage fully, love deeply, and work wholeheartedly, but without the desperate clinging that creates so much suffering. A Zen monk was once asked, "What is the secret of your serenity?" He replied, "Wholehearted cooperation with the inevitable." This doesn't mean passive resignation, but a clear seeing acceptance of what cannot be changed, coupled with wise action in areas where we can make a difference. The Serenity Prayer captures this same wisdom. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In Zen practice, this wisdom arises not through analysis, but through the development of clear perception, unobscured by our habitual patterns of thinking. As we learn to see reality more directly, without the overlay of our projections, assumptions, and desires, appropriate action arises naturally from that clear seeing. Consider how differently we might respond to a difficult situation when seeing it freshly versus reacting from old patterns. If someone speaks harshly to us, our habitual response might be immediate defensiveness or a counterattack. But if we can pause, take a breath, and see the person before us, perhaps noticing their stress, fear, or pain, a very different response becomes possible, one that might de-escalate tension rather than increasing it. This capacity to respond freshly rather than react habitually is developed through Zazen practice. As we sit still watching thoughts and emotions arise and pass away, without following them, we create a space between stimulus and response. This space is the ground of freedom, the possibility of choosing our response rather than being driven by conditioning. It is the silent pause that transforms our life. The Zen perspective also transforms our relationship to time. Much of our anxiety stems from dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. Zen points us back to the present moment, not as a mere spiritual platitude, but as the only place where life actually happens and where we have the power to act. Consider how much mental energy we expend on regretting past actions or anxiously anticipating future scenarios. This time traveling of the mind removes us from direct experience and creates suffering that exists only in thought. When we return to the simplicity of the present, the breath moving in the body, the sensations of walking, the taste of food, we discover a ground of being that is always available beneath the turbulence of thinking. This doesn't mean we never plan for the future or learn from the past. It means we do so from a place of present awareness rather than being lost in thought. The difference is palpable, like the difference between being caught in a dream and being awake within the dream, aware that you're dreaming. A Zen teaching illustrates this with the metaphor of the second arrow. The Buddha asked a student, "If a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful?" The student replied, "Yes, it is." The Buddha then asked if the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful? The student replied, "Yes, of course." The Buddha then explained, in life we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. The second arrow is optional. This teaching points to the difference between primary pain, the inevitable discomforts of life from physical illness to loss and disappointment, and the secondary suffering we add through resistance, judgment, and narrative. The first arrow may be unavoidable, but the second is optional dependent on how we meet experience. Through Zen practice, we develop the capacity to feel the first arrow without shooting ourselves with the second. We learn to be with pain without amplifying it, through resistance to face difficulty without adding the burden of "this shouldn't be happening" or "I can't bear this." This doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but transforms our relationship to them, reducing unnecessary suffering and freeing energy for skillful response. This perspective is particularly valuable in times of loss and grief. When someone we love dies, when a relationship ends, when health fails, it's natural to feel pain. Zen doesn't ask us to suppress this pain or to transcend it prematurely. Rather, it invites us to be fully present with grief, to allow it to move through us without resistance, knowing that, like all experiences, it will change over time. There's a famous Zen story about a woman whose only son died. In her grief, she carried the child's body to a wise Zen master and begged him to bring her son back to life. The master, seeing her profound suffering, told her he could help. At first, she needed to bring him a special herb that could only be found in a house that had never known sorrow. He instructed her to go from house to house in the village asking for this herb. The woman, filled with a desperate hope, went from door to door. At each home she heard stories of loss and grief, a husband who had died, a child who had passed away, or parents who were long gone. Slowly, the truth began to dawn on her. She realized that suffering was universal, that no home was untouched by loss. With this profound understanding, she returned to the master, ready to bury her son and continue her life with a new perspective on the universality of suffering and the preciousness of life. This story points to how Zen helps us contextualize our personal suffering within the larger human experience. When we recognize that pain is not a personal failure, but a universal and inherent aspect of being alive, we feel less isolated in our difficulties and more connected to the shared human journey. This connection is further developed through the cultivation of compassion, not as a lofty ideal, but as the natural response of a heart that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness. When we truly understand that we are not separate from others, their suffering becomes our concern not through a moral imperative, but through a direct perception of our shared being. The Zen approach to compassion differs from conventional understandings. It isn't based on pity or the sense that I have something to give to you who are lacking. Rather, it arises from the quiet recognition that your suffering and mine are not separate. This subtle difference transforms compassionate action from something we do from a position of superiority to an authentic response to the reality of our interdependence. Consider how differently we might approach helping someone if we see them as other, an unfortunate person who needs our assistance, versus recognizing that their well-being and ours are inextricably linked. The first approach, though well-intentioned, maintains a separation. The second dissolves the boundary between giver and receiver and allows for a more authentic connection. This understanding of interconnectedness extends beyond human relationships to include all of life. Zen teaches that we are not separate from the natural world, but an integral part of it. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. These aren't resources external to us, but aspects of the vast web of life of which we are a part. A Zen master was once asked about the relationship between humans and nature. He replied, "There is no relationship because there are not two things to be related." This teaching points to the artificial nature of the boundary we draw between ourselves and the environment. When we truly understand this, caring for the earth becomes not a moral obligation or a cause, but the natural expression of caring for ourselves. This perspective transforms our approach to environmental challenges. Instead of seeing climate change or species extinction as abstract problems happening elsewhere, we recognize that what happens to the earth happens to us. This isn't just poetic language, but biological reality. The air, water, and soil are not separate from our bodies. They are continuously becoming part of us through breathing, drinking, and eating. The Zen tradition has long expressed this intimate connection with the natural world. Many Zen teachers have been poets whose work celebrates the wisdom revealed in mountains, rivers, birds, and trees. The Japanese haiku tradition, deeply influenced by Zen, focuses attention on the small details of nature that reveal the vast mystery of existence. A frog jumping into an old pond, autumn leaves falling the first winter snow. This attention to nature isn't romantic escapism, but a way of reconnecting with the reality of our existence as embodied beings living within, not apart from the natural world. By developing intimacy with the more than human world, noticing the birds in our neighborhood, the patterns of weather, the plants growing in cracks in the sidewalk, we remember our participation in something larger than our human concerns. This remembering doesn't require special circumstances or pristine wilderness, though such experiences can be powerful. It's available wherever we are, in city parks and suburban backyards, as well as remote forests. It comes not from the setting, but from the quality of attention we bring to our surroundings. Consider how differently we might experience a walk through a local park if we're lost in thought about work problems, versus if we're fully present, noticing the texture of tree bark, the songs of birds, the feeling of the air on our skin. The same physical environment becomes a completely different experience depending on the quality of our attention. This quality of attention is developed through practices like Zazen, where we learn to be present with our immediate experience rather than lost in thought. As this capacity for presence deepens, we naturally become more attuned to the living world around us. We notice more, appreciate more, and feel our connection more directly. This sense of connection fosters what Zen teacher and environmentalist Joanna Macy calls active hope, not optimism based on the likelihood of success, but a deep commitment arising from love for the world. The Zen perspective on technology offers valuable guidance for navigating our increasingly digital world. While Zen doesn't reject technology, many Zen centers use websites and video platforms. It encourages us to use these tools mindfully rather than being used by them. In our hyper-connected age, many of us experience what researchers call continuous partial attention, a state of being perpetually distracted by notifications, updates, and the lure of endless information. This fragmented awareness leaves us feeling scattered and exhausted, unable to be fully present with anything or anyone. Zen practice counteracts this tendency by developing the capacity for sustained attention. Through meditation, we train ourselves to stay with a single focus: the breath, bodily sensations, environmental sounds. Rather than following every thought or impulse that arises, this training becomes increasingly valuable in a world designed to capture and monetize our attention. A Zen approach to technology might include practices like designated device-free times, mindful use of social media, and regular digital fasts. It's not about rejecting the benefits of technology, but about using it intentionally rather than compulsively in ways that enhance rather than diminish our humanity. This intentionality extends to how we consume information. In an age of information overload, Zen reminds us that wisdom doesn't come from accumulating more data, but from digesting and integrating what we encounter. Sometimes less input and more reflection lead to greater understanding than constant consumption of new content. The Zen perspective on work offers valuable guidance for finding meaning and balance in our professional lives. In the traditional monastery work, Samu was considered an integral part of spiritual practice, not separate from meditation. Cooking, cleaning, gardening, and maintaining the monastery were all approached with the same attention and presence cultivated in formal meditation. This integration of work and practice challenges the common modern separation between spiritual life and work life. Rather than seeking meaning exclusively in designated spiritual activities, Zen invites us to bring the same qualities of presence, care, and non-attachment to our daily work. Consider how differently we might experience even routine tasks, answering emails, attending meetings, completing reports, if approached with full attention rather than resistance or boredom. The quality of our experience isn't determined solely by the nature of the activity, but by how we engage with it. A Zen story illustrates this perspective. A young monk complained to his teacher about the tedium of daily chores in the monastery. "When will I have time for real practice?" he asked. The teacher replied, "Tell me when you're sweeping the courtyard. What do you think about?" The student admitted, "I'm usually thinking about finishing quickly so I can go meditate." The teacher said, "That's your mistake. When sweeping, just sweep. Give yourself completely to each activity, and you'll discover that life doesn't divide into practice and non-practice. It's all your path." This teaching points to the possibility of finding meaning and presence in whatever work we're doing. The Zen approach to health and illness offers wisdom for navigating the vulnerabilities of embodied existence. In a culture that often treats illness as a failure, and death as the ultimate defeat. Zen reminds us that sickness, aging, and death are natural aspects of being human, not aberrations or punishments. This perspective doesn't diminish the importance of medical care or health-promoting practices. It suggests that even as we take reasonable measures to maintain well-being, we can accept the fundamental vulnerability of the body without adding layers of fear, shame, or resistance. A Zen teacher who was diagnosed with a serious illness was asked by a student, "How do you maintain such peace despite your condition?" The teacher replied, "I don't fight against reality. This body is getting sick. That's what bodies sometimes do. But I am more than this body, and so are you." The nature of awareness remains clear even when the body is compromised. This teaching points to the distinction between primary pain, the physical sensations of illness or injury, and the secondary suffering we add through resistance, fear, and narrative. While we may not be able to eliminate physical pain, we can reduce unnecessary suffering by meeting our experience with acceptance rather than struggle. This acceptance isn't passive resignation, but clear-seeing engagement with reality as it is. We still seek appropriate treatment and support. We still express our preferences for health over illness, but we do so without the additional burden of "this shouldn't be happening" or "why me?" responses that add mental anguish to physical discomfort. The practice of Zazen develops the capacity to be with physical discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. As we sit still, noticing bodily sensations without immediately reacting to them, we discover that we can be with pain without being defined by it. This capacity serves us not only in meditation, but in navigating the inevitable physical challenges that arise throughout life. This perspective is particularly valuable in chronic illness or conditions that don't respond to treatment. When complete healing is impossible, the capacity to accept limitation without being crushed by it becomes essential. Many who live with chronic conditions report that mindfulness practices help them maintain quality of life and meaning even with ongoing physical challenges. The Zen approach to pleasure is equally transformative. Rather than an endless pursuit of more intense or frequent pleasant experiences, the hedonic treadmill that leaves many feeling perpetually unsatisfied, Zen teaches us to fully savor simple pleasures without grasping. Consider the Japanese tea ceremony, a practice deeply influenced by Zen. Every aspect of the ceremony, the preparation of the space, the heating of the water, the whisking of the tea, is performed with complete attention. This focus allows participants to appreciate subtle pleasures that might be overlooked in a more hurried approach. The sound of water being poured, the texture of the ceramic cup, the complex flavors of the tea itself. This capacity to appreciate simple pleasures is available in everyday life, not just in formal ceremonies. The taste of a ripe peach, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of rain on a roof. These ordinary experiences become extraordinary when met with full attention. Many people report that meditation practice enhances their sensory awareness, allowing them to enjoy simple pleasures more deeply. This enjoyment doesn't come from grasping or trying to intensify experience, but from the capacity to be fully present with what is. As one Zen saying puts it, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." This seemingly simple instruction points to the direct and mediated experience of life's basic pleasures, without the overlay of conceptual thinking that so often diminishes direct experience. The Zen perspective on community offers valuable guidance for navigating navigating our relationships and social connections. In the Buddhist tradition, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, is considered one of the three jewels or refuges along with the Buddha, awakened awareness, and the Dharma, the teachings and practices that lead to awakening. This emphasis on community recognizes that spiritual development doesn't happen in isolation, but through interaction, feedback, and mutual support. The Sangha provides both practical assistance and the mirror of relationship in which we can see ourselves more clearly. In traditional Zen monasteries, the daily schedule includes extensive time in group meditation, shared meals, and communal work. And this immersion in community creates both challenges and opportunities for practice. The minor frictions of communal living, differences in preference, personality clashes, competing needs become opportunities to observe our reactions and to practice patience, communication, and consideration. In our modern context, while formal Zen communities still exist, the principles of Sangha can inform all our relationships, helping us approach connections with greater presence, care, and authenticity. A core Zen teaching relevant to community is the recognition of interdependence. Nothing and no one exists in isolation. We are continuously shaped by and shaping those around us. Our actions, words, and even thoughts affect others in ways both obvious and subtle. When we truly recognize this interconnectedness, we naturally become more mindful of our impact. This recognition doesn't mean losing healthy boundaries or subsuming our needs to others. It suggests that our well-being is inextricably linked with the well-being of those around us. The happier, more peaceful, and more free our community members are, the more supportive the environment is for our own flourishing. The Zen approach to communication offers particular wisdom for navigating the complexities of human interaction. In the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha included right speech as an essential aspect of practice, recognizing the power of words to either harm or heal, to create conflict or understanding. Right speech isn't about rigid rules, but about bringing awareness to our communication, noticing our intentions, considering the impact of our words, and speaking from a place of presence rather than reactivity. Includes aspects like truthfulness, kindness, timeliness, and usefulness, asking us to consider not just what we say, but how and why we say it. In Zen practice, periods of silence called session, which literally means gathering the mind, help us observe the habits of speech and thought that often operate unconsciously. By temporarily stepping back from conversation, we can notice the impulses that drive our communication, the need to be right, to be liked, to fill space, or to control outcomes. This awareness creates the possibility for more conscious and compassionate expression. When we do speak, Zen encourages us to come from a place of presence rather than from rehearsed positions or automatic reactions. This presence allows for genuine dialogue and mutual exploration of understanding, rather than parallel monologues where neither person is truly listening to the other. The quality of our listening is equally important. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh coined the term deep listening to describe a way of attending to others with our full presence without interruption, judgment, or planning our response. This quality of attention creates space for the speaker to express themselves more fully and for genuine understanding to emerge. This deep listening isn't limited to human conversation but extends to all of life. By attending closely to the natural world, to our bodies, and to the subtle currents of experience, we open ourselves to wisdom that isn't available through conceptual thinking alone. As one Zen saying puts it, when walking, walk, when eating, eat. This seemingly simple instruction points to the profound practice of giving our complete attention to each activity and each encounter. The Zen perspective on social justice offers valuable guidance for working toward a more equitable and compassionate world. While some misunderstand meditation as a purely personal practice focused on inner peace, the Zen tradition has a rich history of social engagement, with many teachers working actively to address poverty, discrimination, and environmental destruction. This engagement arises not from ideology, but from the direct perception of our fundamental interconnectedness. When we truly understand that there is no separate self, the suffering of others becomes our concern, not through moral obligation, but through the recognition that their well-being and ours are inseparable. A Zen approach to social justice emphasizes both inner and outer transformation. Without inner work, our efforts to change society may replicate the very patterns of aggression, self-righteousness, and othering that we're trying to overcome. Without outer engagement, our inner practice may become a form of spiritual bypassing that ignores real suffering in the world. The integration of these dimensions is beautifully captured in the Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The activities may look the same from the outside, but they're informed by a different understanding, a clearer perception of our interconnectedness and responsibility to one another. This clarity doesn't lead to a rigid certainty about political positions, but to a more nuanced, compassionate engagement that recognizes the complexity of social issues and the humanity of all involved, even those with whom we deeply disagree. It allows for a firm commitment to equity and justice while maintaining an open heart toward those who see things differently. The Zen approach to conflict, whether personal or social, emphasizes understanding the roots of hostility rather than responding in kind. When met with aggression, our instinctive reaction is often to become aggressive ourselves or to withdraw in fear. Zen practice helps us find a middle way, remaining present and engaged without either attacking or abandoning the field. This capacity to stay present in difficult situations develops through meditation practice. As we sit quietly observing our reactions without being controlled by them, we build the inner resources to respond skillfully rather than reactively in challenging circumstances. We learn to notice when we're becoming angry or afraid, and to reconnect with our breath and body rather than being carried away by emotion. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings or adopting a facade of detachment. It means feeling fully while maintaining enough awareness to choose our response rather than being driven by conditioning. This creates the possibility for genuine dialogue and understanding across differences. The Zen perspective on leadership offers valuable guidance for those in positions of influence, whether in families, workplaces, communities, or larger systems. Traditional Zen emphasizes the teacher-student relationship as a vehicle for the transmission of wisdom, with teachers embodying the qualities they aim to cultivate in others. This embodiment is central to effective leadership in any context. As the saying goes, "Your actions speak so loudly I cannot hear what you're saying." When leaders live the values they espouse, presence, compassion, integrity, service, they create a field of influence that affects everyone around them more powerfully than words alone. Zen leadership also emphasizes the balance of compassion and clarity. Compassion without clarity can become enabling or indulgent, while clarity without compassion can be harsh or rigid. The integration of these qualities allows leaders to hold high standards while supporting growth and to be firm about boundaries without diminishing others' dignity. This balance is reflected in the practice of upaya, or skillful means, the capacity to adapt one's approach to the needs and readiness of different individuals. A skilled teacher or leader doesn't apply the same method to everyone, but discerns what will be most helpful for each person in their particular circumstances. The Zen perspective on creativity offers valuable insights for artistic expression in any medium. While some approaches to art emphasize self-expression or the mastery of a technique, Zen points to something more fundamental, the quality of presence we bring to the creative process. In traditional Zen arts like calligraphy, painting, flower arrangement, and poetry, the emphasis isn't on producing an impressive final work, but on the state of mind from which the creation emerges. Years of training develop technical skill, but the highest expression comes when the artist disappears into the act, when there is no longer a separation between creator and creation. A story beautifully illustrates this understanding. A master painter was commissioned to create a bamboo forest for a wealthy patron. He spent years observing bamboo in all seasons and conditions, in rain and sun, in wind and stillness, at dawn and dusk. When he finally took up his brush, he completed the painting in a single fluid session. The patron watching him work exclaimed, "How can you paint so quickly after making me wait so long?" The artist replied, "It took years for the bamboo to grow within me. The painting itself was merely the final moment of that growth." This story points to the integration of preparation and spontaneity that characterizes Zen creativity. The rigorous development of skill creates the conditions for freedom, for the falling away of self-consciousness that allows direct expression to emerge. This approach to creativity isn't limited to traditional arts, but applies to any creative endeavor, from cooking to coding, from writing to designing, from teaching to parenting. Whatever the medium, the quality of attention we bring to the process shapes both the outcome and our experience of creating it. In all these areas of life, from our relationship with nature to our approach to creativity, from our engagement with social justice to our navigation of conflict, Zen offers practices that transform our experience not by changing external conditions, but by shifting how we relate to them. This inside-out approach doesn't diminish the importance of working for positive change in the world. It suggests that such work is most effective when it arises from a clear, seeing and compassionate presence rather than from reaction and self-righteousness. The journey of Zen isn't about reaching a final destination or achieving a permanent state of bliss. It's about an ongoing process of awakening, of seeing more clearly, of responding to life with greater freedom and compassion. It doesn't promise a life without difficulties, but offers practices that transform our relationship to difficulty, allowing us to meet life's inevitable challenges with greater ease and clarity. As we walk this path, we discover that what we've been seeking, peace, meaning, connection, isn't found elsewhere, but in the quality of our attention to what's already here. The extraordinary is revealed within the ordinary when we learn to see with fresh eyes and to meet life directly without the veil of habitual thinking. In this direct meeting, we find the freedom and peace that have been our birthright all along. May this exploration of Zen wisdom serve as a doorway to your own direct experience, your own discovery of the peace and clarity that are always available when we learn to be fully present for this precious human life. The path is walked one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of presence at a time. And in this very moment, right here, the journey both begins and reaches completion. Thank you for walking this path with us at Calm Buddha Stories. May the ancient wisdom of Zen continue to illuminate your way through life's inevitable storms and sunshine. Remember that beyond all concepts and teachings lies your own direct experience, the true teacher that has been with you all along. We bow in gratitude to the lineage of teachers who have preserved these teachings, to all beings who support our practice, and to you for your sincere engagement with this timeless wisdom.